And thank you for having us today. Next slide, please. So Amy and I have both worked in academic libraries for about over a decade total. Many of you might have a kind of a traditional perspective of what libraries do. You think libraries and librarians just deal with books. Well, and that is true, that's part of our job, but libraries have a long history of organizing, preserving, and making materials accessible. And throughout the 20th and now especially in the 21st century, we're doing that with different formats of things. So I am a biomedical engineering librarian, which means I work with several departments at my school's College of Engineering, and I pretty much work with exclusively online materials. So journal articles, conference proceedings, ebooks, patents, trademarks, standards, all of those sorts of things. So we're doing the same things that librarians have done for thousands of years. We're just doing that with different formats. And over the past 10 to 15 years, academic libraries have become increasingly involved in the area of research data and research data management. So within academia, there's become an increasing awareness that the data generated within research projects is a very important and valuable part of the research life cycle and any scholarly project. So that means it needs to be treated with the same care and attention that other products may be treated with, such as journal articles. So within academic libraries, we're taking our skills of organizing, preserving, and making things accessible and translating that into providing research data services. And obviously to provide those services, libraries need to have professionals to staff those services. So you may have heard of data librarians, data services librarians, that's kind of what they are working on. And this is definitely outside the traditional area of academic libraries. So many libraries are trying to recruit candidates outside of the traditional library pipeline. That pipeline would be students who get a master's in library science or an MLS degree, which is the terminal degree for librarianship as a profession. But now libraries are trying to seek candidates outside of that pipeline. So people who have advanced degrees in other disciplines like master's or even doctoral degrees. And then just one kind of other point is, of course, there's an increased focus in diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility principles and practices within academic libraries and higher ed in general, which will tie into our project shortly. Next slide, please. So for this research project, Amy and I gathered and analyzed 177 data librarian job postings that were inside the United States from 2013 to 2018. So we did qualitative coding of each job posting looking for specific variables. So we developed a codebook prior to analyzing the job postings, and this codebook contained about 45 variables that we were looking for. There's a bit.ly link on this slide if you'd like to look at our entire codebook. So an example of variables that we were looking at were things like salary. Was salary mentioned? If so, was it mentioned with to describe words? Was a quantitative value given? Those sorts of things. We also heavily looked at degree requirements as well as different experiences they were looking for, trying to basically develop a landscape of what does it mean to be a data professional within academic libraries. Next slide, please. So here are the two research questions we focused on for this project. So what are the most frequently occurring qualifications and responsibilities for data professional positions? And the second question is what is the median salary and salary range for these positions? So as I mentioned at the beginning, Amy and I collectively have about a decade of experience working in data services within academic libraries. And we realized more and more as we were reading through these 177 job postings that sometimes we had no clue what the library was asking for. The language was very ambiguous, it was very vague, and we thought if we don't know what they're asking for with our experience, how would a new graduate or somebody outside of academic libraries be able to interpret that job posting? And that sort of ambiguity is not going to attract people to apply for those positions. And I know from my personal experience, there's been institutions I've worked at where they've had failed searches, which wastes a lot of time and money and aggravation for everybody. So thinking very carefully about your job postings may be one way to try and prevent that and to get a good candidate pool. We also realized that a lot of these job postings were not very friendly from a DEIA perspective. Actually, they were really troubling from a DEIA perspective. So rather than just focusing our research on what's the landscape of our profession within academic libraries, we shifted the focus to be how can we use the data that we're collecting to convince people to write job postings with a DEIA lens from the beginning rather than an afterthought. So all of our research takeaways and recommendations are from that perspective. Next slide, please. So I'll just give you some metadata about the job postings, so the information about the postings themselves. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we collected 177 job postings from this time frame. We actually collected more than that, but these 177 were the ones that met the inclusion criteria for our project. And that actually corresponded to 180 job positions, meaning that 3 postings were actually trying to hire 2 people. These positions were pretty well geographically spread out across the United States, representing 37 states and Washington, D.C. Not surprisingly, the state with the most postings was California, with 13 during this time period. Our positions represented 109 different universities. The vast majority of them, 146, were from doctoral universities with very high research activities, which is their Carnegie classification. Those are formally known as R1 institutions. And then finally, we interestingly found that there was 119 unique job titles out of the 180 job positions. So there really isn't much agreement within the community as to what these positions should actually be titled. Next slide, please. Another interesting finding related to the job titles is over 1/3 of these positions did not use the word librarian in the job title. You can see some examples over on the right of titles that did not use the word librarian. So using titles like specialist, coordinator, consultant, or curator. So we found this to be really interesting and a great indication of how libraries are trying to recruit people outside of the traditional academic pipeline. So for example, with this quantitative data specialist for the social sciences, they may have been trying to recruit somebody who, say, has a PhD in the social sciences. And if they had given the title librarian, there may be people with that degree who think, I'm not a librarian. I didn't get a degree in library science, so I'm not qualified for that. So our key takeaway from this is to really think broadly about your job titles. The title that the person prior had doesn't necessarily have to be the title that is on this job posting. Of course, the caveat with all of our recommendations is we know that sometimes you're very constrained by what your division, unit, organization, or institution will allow you to do, but at least you can, there are some things you can try to do. So we found this to be very promising as a way to attract a really diverse candidate pool for these positions. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk about some selected results from our first research question, which was looking at the most frequently occurring responsibilities and qualifications for these positions. These are obviously very selected results. We won't go through all 45 variables during this call, but we're happy to talk about any of the other variables if you're interested. Next slide, please. So we looked at what sort of degrees they were asking for. And interestingly, only about 30% of these postings required the library science degree and wouldn't accept a different degree. The vast majority of these postings would actually accept the library degree, like the MLIS as it's abbreviated here, or an equivalent degree. And how they describe that equivalent degree varied quite considerably. Some were very specific and some were very vague. The phrase that I hate the most is when they say MLIS degree or equivalent combination of education and experience. How is the candidate supposed to know if their education and experience is equivalent? that was really kind of the bane of our coding process for myself and Amy. So we also looked at, for these degrees, if they allowed an equivalent degree besides the Master's of Library Science degree, did they list some sort of disciplinary background that they were hoping to attract? And that's the graph you can see over on the left. And actually the answer to that is really no. Most of them either used a term like relevant, appropriate, or comparable to describe the discipline of the degree. And then the next most frequent descriptor was actually none at all. They didn't specify a specific discipline. So we found this to be a really good example of where libraries are using really ambiguous language and they're not being as specific as they could be, especially if they're trying to attract people outside of their traditional pipeline. So instead of just saying equivalent advanced degree, like we show on this slide, they could say equivalent degree in social sciences, STEM, or humanities. So that would say, we're really open to candidates who have any sort of background. And it doesn't leave the candidate guessing whether they are qualified or not. You could also add phrases like, if you are unsure if your education and experience meets the qualifications, please contact this person. Give their name, title, and contact information, which gives the candidates an opportunity to get information before they apply. Because my gut feeling is that if candidates aren't really sure, they're not going to apply for it. Next slide, please. We also looked at this variable of additional degree. In many job postings, they listed one degree and then they wanted an additional degree as well. And this was mentioned in 60% of the postings. Luckily, about 80% of these mentions were as a preferred qualification, and the remaining 20% were as a required qualification. And the graph on the left will show you what degree level they were seeking for this additional degree. And you can see the vast majority were looking for an advanced degree, meaning a graduate or professional level degree. So when you think about this, it means that many of these positions are actually looking for people who have multiple graduate degrees. It may not be required, but it's actually their preferred candidate. And societal inequities prevent this from many people from being able to achieve even a bachelor's degree, nonetheless, one graduate degree or multiple graduate degrees. So I'd urge people to really take a look and say, how does this additional degree help the person fulfill the job responsibilities? If it's not directly related to the job responsibilities, I would encourage you to not put it in there, just because we've seen there's so many inequities in our society that really prevent people from that have access to these degrees, or nonetheless multiple graduate degrees. And next slide, please. And then finally, we looked at DEIA as a qualification. Now, we weren't looking at kind of generic statements by the library, the unit, or the organization of supporting DEIA in practice. We were actually looking to see if this was listed as one of the qualifications for candidates. And it was mentioned in about 40% of the positions. We were excited to see that 70% of these mentions were as a required qualification, and the other 20% were preferred, and then the remaining were in a responsibility. And you can see in the graph on the left that mentions of DEIA as a qualification were actually increasing over time, which is a good sign. But overall, we've found that DEIA as a qualification was still only mentioned in about half of the positions. So if organizations are really committed to hiring people who understand the importance of DEIA and want to implement it in their work, it really should be a qualification. And we would encourage you to make it a required qualification, so that candidates know upfront that this is something they need to be talking about in their cover letters and be prepared to talk about in interviews. So with that, I will turn it over to Amy.
Thank you. So I would like to talk a bit about salary. That's a very important aspect to job ads and the hiring process, of course. And our very large point here is that 43% of the postings did not mention salary at all. And that is incredibly troubling. And I'll get into a little bit more of why that is. So you can see here on the graph on the left that the majority of folks did not put any salary info. The next most frequent occurrence was when they would put just words only. So words like competitive or commensurate or things like that, followed by words and value, and the smallest portion was actually numeric value. So that's incredibly troubling for a few different reasons. So we have a couple takeaways here. One of them is really to be transparent about your salary. Otherwise, you're inherently favoring folks who are already on the inside, and that defeats the purpose of trying to recruit candidates from outside the pipeline. And I say that because if you say something like competitive or commensurate and they're not already in that field, how do they know what it's competitive with? They don't really have a starting point. Another point I'd like to make about this is we really recommend that you list not only a numeric value, but a salary range, because that indicates to candidates that there is a possibility for negotiation. And in our paper, we have a few studies cited that show that folks from underrepresented groups are much less likely to feel comfortable negotiating a salary. And so again, you're limiting. If you don't put a salary value, sometimes we've seen that folks from underrepresented groups just simply won't apply. Or again, they don't know that they're able to negotiate. So we definitely encourage that. So 26% of the postings that we looked at did list a quantitative salary value. That is quite low. That's only about a quarter. And here's just a little bit of information about what we found. We have the salary range and a median. And really, our takeaway here is, we were trying to answer, is this representative of the field? And we really don't know, since only a quarter listed a salary value. So as a profession, we aren't able to say, really have any good data about what is fair. And that really just further perpetuates, either folks from underrepresented groups not even, getting in the door or being paid less because this information just is not available to them. So now I'm excited to talk about my favorite part of the presentation, and that is our recommendations. And some of you might be wondering, why are we talking about libraries, when we're on a cyber infrastructure call? And a few things about that. One is that there's actually a lot of similarities between our professions. And secondly, we really tried to collect this data and make that available for other groups within higher education. And so these recommendations are definitely applicable to the cyber infrastructure community as well as other fields as well. So our first recommendation is really to, and Joanna got at this a bit earlier, is to really write every sentence within your job posting through the lens of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. So don't make it an afterthought. Don't make it the generic, the regents care about diversity statement. And I actually think that we can do better than just making it a single required qualification. So if you look at every required and preferred qualification through this lens, you're really going to ensure that lots of different folks, that this is accessible to a lot of different folks, and you'll get a bigger and more diverse candidate pool. As I was just mentioning, please list a quantitative salary value. If possible, list a range. I think that's very, very, very important. For qualifications, Joanna got at this a bit. So really limit the number of your required qualifications. Our recommendation here is based on the fact that folks from underrepresented groups are less likely to apply for positions unless they meet every single one of the qualifications. And so by making a huge laundry list of required qualifications, folks are becoming less and less comfortable applying for your job. So really think about, we recommend maybe pick 3 requirements of just, must have, can't live without, and then put everything else in the preferred qualifications. And again, don't put a giant laundry list there either. Be selective and really, really think about what are the qualifications that this person's going to need to be able to do the job. So next, the degrees are very important. So consider which degrees to include as required and preferred, as Joanna was talking about. Does the person really need multiple or advanced degrees or multiple advanced degrees to do your position or not? And if not, we would definitely encourage you to say in your job posting that maybe you accept experience, and you can be more specific. So say a degree or 3 years of experience working in this field. And that's, again, getting away from some of that ambiguous language of that we're trying to avoid. So really think carefully about what degrees are required and why, because not only are you limiting the number of people who have those degrees, but as Joanna was getting at, that's really baking in a lot of societal inequities, because folks from underrepresented groups often have fewer opportunities to get those advanced degrees. So you're just limiting the pool in terms of number and diversity as well. So consider undergraduate degrees as relevant experience, as well as academic background or work background. I was on a hiring committee, and we explicitly said in there that we were okay hiring students who had just recently graduated. And so we put that language in there explicitly and really thought carefully about how to craft the other requirements around that as well. So maybe they had experience in something because they took a class in it. We definitely encouraged that. And the outcome of that hire, we got a great person who was fresh out of graduate school, and they're doing fantastic. So, so definitely consider that. Include diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility as one of your few required qualifications. And we can share some language. I'm only just thinking, sorry, we didn't put it on a slide, but for example, at UC Berkeley, we crafted some language that is an actual required qualification and that you can use. And I would be happy to talk offline about that or share that out to the group if that would be interesting to folks. So eliminate ambiguous terms. So things like equivalent, relevant, those are confusing and those are exclusive. If you're not already working in the field, that honestly means nothing. So do a pass through your job ad just looking for those words and eliminate those. We also recommend that you write the job description that the candidate will actually perform. We saw a lot of troubling job descriptions. Sometimes people call them unicorn positions, where it's aspirational and you're looking for a person with 3 advanced degrees to do, work in 5 different areas. And that sounds great, but again, you're probably not going to find a candidate that can do all of those. They're probably already on the inside. They're probably from a dominant group. So really think about, the day-to-day, what they're going to do. And then you could write in the job description, possibility to work in these areas depending on backgrounds and interests. So making it seem like, there's other possibilities once they get in there, but not putting the entire laundry list of your hopes and dreams into job ads. We also encourage you to ask for feedback about your job description. So ask different people who don't look like you, people who aren't in your department, maybe somebody who's not in the cyber infrastructure field, to take a look at the job description and see, does it make sense to them? Do they know what you're asking? Is this something that seems friendly to them? And also, I would encourage you to have at least one person on your search committee who's, again, not in your kind of immediate circle, somebody who's very, very different. I think that would help a lot. And then Joanna alluded to this a little bit before, but start now. And although you might, you're probably not like the HR person, and your institution probably has specific requirements about what has to go on job ads. One of the reasons why we are sharing this is because we actually have quantitative data about these topics. I think a lot of us, I know I was previously in the position of like, well, this doesn't feel right, but I don't really have something solid that I can go to the hiring manager about or HR about and make recommended changes. But now that we actually have this data and we have it up in a data repository and are happy to share this with all of you, at Berkeley, I can't remember, I was trying to make a change to our hiring practice, and I got the usual, oh, well, we've always done it this way. I think that's one of the really common arguments that you hear. And I was able to share our findings from this study and say, actually, this is showing that if you do it this way, you're not likely to attract diverse candidates. This isn't very equitable in these ways. And they changed immediately. And then now all of our different hiring practices include that change. So I think it's really strong if you can start the conversation. I think it's even stronger if you can bring the conversation really like solid data. I'd also like to share this. Joanna found this. And it's about integrating anti-racism into your job postings. And we wanted to mention anti-racism specifically because, of course, of what's going on in the world right now. And so we are also encouraging you to include anti-racism in your postings as well. And the quote we included here is, "Now is the time to update the language in the job announcement to specifically express a commitment to hiring anti-racist people. Also, institutions must move to require the submission of an anti-racist statement rather than a diversity, equity, and inclusion statement as part of the application." So as you're thinking about D, E, I, and A, we definitely encourage you to think explicitly about anti-racism as well, and including that. That also indicates to candidates that your department and your university care about these issues. And so folks are likely to be a lot more comfortable applying to your institution as well as working there in the long term. So we have a few questions. I'm seeing down here that the chat is blowing up, and I can't wait to stop sharing my screen so I can see what's going on in chat. But we have a few questions. Before we get to that, I would like to point out that we did put together this list of references for you. I'm really excited to, you might have noticed that our illustrations that we're using are all of Black folks, and I found this really cool Black illustrations graphic pack, I guess. So I wanted to share that with all of you in case you want to use those for your presentations as well. I also included a link to our paper that we've mentioned that was recently published. And then we also have our data set available as well if you would like to take a look at our data, if you would like to replicate our study. Actually, Joanna is doing another version of our study looking specifically at engineering librarians, which is really cool. And then I also included a link to our first paper on this topic, which is kind of a preview of the big research paper. So these resources are here for you. And yeah, so I guess I would love to hear from all of you. Some things that are on my mind are really, how do these findings relate to efforts that are going on in CARC right now? I think I saw many of you at the National Science Foundation Cyber Infrastructure Workforce Workshop last month, and there was a lot of talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion there. So how can we take some of this and bring it into CARC? I'm also wondering, what other recommendations do you have? What are you doing at your institutions that weren't on our list, or maybe were on our list and are working well? So I'd love to hear what's going on at other institutions. And also, if you encounter pushback, have you encountered pushback? Like I was sharing at Berkeley at first, I got the kind of like, well, we've always done it this way. Did you overcome this? How did you overcome this? And really, how can we help? So I think I'm gonna stop there and look at all of you.
Amy, I'll just let you know that we've copied most of the questions, or all the questions, into the bottom of the call doc, and I think maybe Joanna's been answering some of them.
Awesome.
So just a FYI.
Cool, thank you, Joanna.
Amy, do you want to go through the questions that are in the Google Doc?
Sure.
Kind of go through them one by one.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first one is the most surprising and unsurprising findings. I think for me, the most surprising was I knew that salary wasn't mentioned quantitatively in postings, but I didn't realize that it was as low as a fourth of job postings. I will say the big caveat with our project is that we could only analyze job postings that we were able to get access to. Our time frame was 2013 to 2018, so some postings were just not available, or the full posting was not available. For example, people might just post a link to their library jobs portal or their university jobs portal, and we couldn't get access to that link because the position had been filled and it was taken down. So we did have to exclude some positions for that reason. But yeah, I was really surprised that only 25% listed a quantitative salary value.
I'll add there that maybe what I wasn't surprised to find is that not a lot of institutions were even mentioning diversity, equity, and inclusion outside of the really generic, like, no, the regions care about this, so I can check a box in HR. And, what we're trying to get at here is moving away from that HR requirement, like check off the box, and really integrate this more holistically. So I was not surprised at that. But I was surprised, and happily surprised, that those mentions were going up over time. And it was really cool to see actual data about that.
Absolutely. And then the next question was, what is the range of years of the postings? That was 2013 to 2018. Next question, are your data available to share? Yes, thank you, whoever put the link in there to our data and our paper. We would love it if people reused our data set and combined it with other data sets. So just keep us informed with what you're doing about it. Like, we made it open because we want people to reuse the data. And I'm sure there's different ways you can think to analyze it that we didn't think of. So please go ahead and use it.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time on our code book and really thinking through like definitions of things. And so we would be delighted if folks found that useful.
Okay, next one. One of the big issues we face is that salaries are significantly lower than private companies. How do you address this? So one thing I would say is, well, personally, I have worked at public universities, so I don't have a perspective of what it's like at private universities or even government organizations or things like that. But I think for the lower salary, you can start talking about some of those benefits, especially benefits that have a financial component. For example, at my university, they have childcare subsidies in certain cases. which isn't salary, but it's definitely financial. Or there's tuition reimbursement for your dependents, or even if you as the employee want to get a degree, they will reimburse tuition as well. Another thing is at public universities, they sometimes give you more vacation than private companies, which might be an attractive benefit to some people. So I think listing those out can be really helpful as a way to differentiate from private companies that have higher salaries. And then of course, providing links to where the potential candidate can get more information about those benefits.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I think listing those things in actual job postings would be really helpful. I think a lot of folks who work in higher education work in those places for reasons beyond just a salary. I know that's the case for me. And so highlighting those things, and then, once the person's there, making opportunities for them to develop themselves, to make impacts in areas that they're passionate about. Maybe things like this, like I'm very grateful I'm able to work on a research study about diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in my job. So yeah, just highlighting those opportunities I think would be really helpful.
And just quickly, Anders put in the chat that flexible work arrangements are important for many underrepresented areas. Absolutely, especially now as we've seen with the pandemic. Hopefully we'll see more institutions and organizations embracing remote work or hybrid work, which could be another, it's not a financial, may not be a financial benefit for you, but it could really attract people to your position. Okay, is the premise of your research that you are not getting good applicant pools for these jobs, good meaning qualified for the position, or considering DEIA? So I will tell you my perspective, and then I'll let you, Amy, do yours. So my perspective is that DEIA is becoming increasingly important within academic libraries and higher ed, but I see the hiring process as one place where DEIA principles and practices have not been put into place as much as they could. So we were just taking a small slice of the hiring practice, job postings, and looking at it from that DEIA lens, and think, how can we make this more candidate friendly? And also making people think, let's get away from this. This is how we've always done it. That's something that's very common in academic libraries, is just because that's the way you've done it previously, it doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be done that way as well. And also with job postings, that's something really concrete in the hiring process that we as outsiders outside of that university have access to. So it's a really good starting point for starting these conversations about the hiring process. And I'm also really excited to say my university or my library is like revamping their hiring and promotion processes this year. And I'm like, I have suggestions. So I'm really excited to use my data to back up some of my recommendations for them.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just really echo what Joanna said. What's interesting is that we kind of started with the former of what you're asking. Like, we really wanted to know, like, what are the qualifications and what does it mean to be a data professional, and are you learning that stuff in school? And that was the beginning. And then once we got in there, we saw so much inequity and so many problems that we really shifted very drastically the focus of our research project. So it's an interesting question you're asking.
Okay, next question. Did the research include analysis of HR laws/policies relating to the factors that you are recommending? Nope, we just based it on the text in the actual job posting, and we tried to be very careful in not sticking very closely to the text, not reading between the lines, not using our professional experience or even our professional connections to say, hey, can we get clarity on this? So we really just tried to stick to the text of the actual job postings, which is what we had.
And that's also what potential candidates have as well. They don't have like an insider, like, oh, I've been working in this field, or I know some people. It's like, that's what the folks who you're trying to recruit see as well.
All right, next question. Do you know how often job postings are scrubbed in the worst direction by HR? Nope, I do not have a perspective on that.
Mm-hmm. Do you, the person who asked?
Actually, it was myself, Amy. No, I just know, having written a number of job postings, that you know, they've been very generic. Sorry, and this was, you know, a number of years ago, but you know, that there might be policies within HR that, oh, we can't talk about salary, oh, you know, and so, you know, it ends up taking things in the wrong direction based on your recommendations.
I'm seeing in the, yeah, I'm seeing in the chat we have an HR person.
Yes, it's me. So, and I didn't ask that question, but well, one, I want to say thank you, because I echo a lot of things that you're talking about here. I do think that there are some things that you know, working at UCLA, and so we're part of the UC system, you know, Amy, so I can appreciate where some of the comments are coming from, and I too have tried to drive changing in the way we structure a job entirely. You know, the UC as a whole has tended to be very overly specific in our job descriptions, and I try to encourage the less is more approach. And also, what I think is more important when we look at diversity, equity, inclusion is that we really have to be proactive about going out and soliciting people to apply for jobs. And so sometimes we have to go beyond the fact that, you know, people are out there looking at job postings, and sometimes we have to go and inform people about a job posting. So I think there's a lot of ways to approach this in a way to improve the pipeline when it comes to consideration of a diverse applicant pool. And that's really what's most important is, you know, open the funnel to as many people as possible with as diverse possible backgrounds. And so things like degrees in and of themselves are inhibitive. You know, you may have people of color that have never been afforded the opportunity to pursue any level of education, but have gained success in their profession by virtue of gaining experience and, you know, moving along the continuum and doing things outside the quote traditional higher education path. So there's a lot of avenues that can be considered, and I appreciate all the work that you guys have done, and this is great information to have.
Thank you. I'm also seeing a nice comment from Megan, and hi Megan, that she worked with the hiring person in HR to change and challenge some of the wordings, and they were open to it. So I love hearing that. That's great. I think sometimes when we think of HR, we think of the word like no, or, you know, it has to be like this, but
you know, I want to bring up an interesting point also that Joanna, I think you brought this up about degree or equivalent experience. And interestingly, that actually is in the HR job framework for CaRCC. And so that I'm wondering if that's something that we should go back and re-examine, or at least how to position that when these job frameworks are translated actually into job postings.
Yeah, I think we should, Bob.
Absolutely. Remember, I'm coming from the perspective of academic libraries as well. So your perspective, that phrase may be understood from the community that you're trying to recruit. Personally, I don't think it's understood within the academic library world of what is equivalent experience. If somebody has never worked in a library, what would that experience actually be? But yeah, thank you for that. Next question. How do you identify or spot racism versus anti-racism, and do people identify as racist? Shouldn't a more positive language like collaborate in a inclusive and diverse environment? So I am not comfortable answering that question. I do not feel I know enough about anti-racism. I'm just starting on that journey myself. So Amy, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll just say that I think up until this point, the more positive language has been used. And from my perspective, it's not enough. As we're seeing what's going on in the world right now, I think being explicitly anti-racist, although it maybe sounds negative, I think is really a way to indicate, you know, where your values are. And so I know at UC Berkeley, I lead a team of our consultants, and we're having a lot of really explicit conversations about anti-racism in there and how we can use our work in research IT and leverage our privilege. You know, we work at a higher ed institution. How can we leverage this for good? And so I think being like positive, like right now is not enough, but that's my personal perspective.
Okay, next question. Any new challenges due to COVID-19? I think the big challenge is that we don't know what our work is going to look like tomorrow. Nonetheless, what it's going to look like in a few weeks or months when this person might start. You know, we don't know about access to buildings. Are we still working remotely? Is it going to be hybrid? That sort of thing. So I think the uncertainty is definitely going to be a challenge.
I think I'll add to that I think that there's a lot more emphasis on the fact that people have like caregiving responsibilities, and that things like caregiving tend to fall to like women and people of color. And so I think that as a society, we're becoming more aware of this. And so I think there's opportunity. I think, Joanna, you talked about it earlier, for, you know, working remote or flexible work hours. And so I think in all of this chaos, there is opportunity, and that now we're all aware of this. And then after the pandemic, maybe I would encourage you to still consider flexible work hours and remote work, and, you know, building in things for caregiving.
And try and get those formalized as well. So it's not just a word of mouth type thing, so that it benefits current as well as future employees in that area.
Hey, before we move on to the next question, I would like to put in a quick plug. So if anybody is interested in doing some of this work in the cyber infrastructure community, I got in touch with Scott Yokel through that NSF workshop that I mentioned before, and he's going to be doing, and Bob and Claire and anybody who knows more about this, please jump in. He's going to be doing some sort of survey. I think he's calling it a census of the cyber infrastructure community. And so he and I are in touch about how can we ask about some of these things from this research study. And so we're trying to bring this into the CI community, and we could use a few more people to help with this effort. So if you are interested in this topic and passionate about it and want to make some change in CI, please get in touch, and we would love to work together. I wanted to say that before people started dropping off. Okay, where are we in the list? Let's see.
I've added in the call document also a link to the questions that you had asked, so that people can go in and add their answers there. So,
thanks, Bob.
Great, thank you. Are there plans to revisit your job hiring results to compare results between pre and post implementation of the job posting changes you've suggested based on your findings? So we've been asking people that as they implement or start conversations based on our data or our recommendations, that they actually reach out to us and let us know how it goes, so we can kind of get some qualitative data from people on how they're actually implementing our results, because we don't want this to just end with the research project. We want people to actually use it for actionable change. So we're hoping that people will keep us informed of that. I will say that when we were gathering our job postings, there were some people who were very cagey about even sharing the job postings. So I don't know if we would go back to those people and ask, like, was this search successful? Would you change that sort of stuff? I don't know if like HR or administration would be willing to share that information with someone outside of the organization. Amy, do you have anything to add?
No, I was just thinking about, I love that question and I love the way you're thinking, whoever asked that. And I think that could be really cool. Oh, it was Megan, of course.
Yeah, one thing another researcher did suggest to me is that most job postings are very aspirational. So contacting the people who are hired for that position to actually go through the job position and see, what of this are you actually doing in your job? Did you have these qualifications? Are you doing these responsibilities? To kind of see what's in the job posting, what the person actually does on a day-to-day basis.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love this next question. Suggestions on how to get candidates to address DEIA in their applications. They said we had a posting that had a DEIA component and no one addressed it in their cover letters. So this is great. One thing that I was thinking about was, make it an interview question, make it part of the job talk prompt. If you make it a required qualification and people don't address it, then they're not qualified. So I think that, if you are following like the HR, like if these are your 3 required qualifications and they don't meet one of them, then sorry, they're not qualified. So I think by integrating it into these different aspects, I think help a lot.
All right, so Amy and Joanna, thank you so much for being with us today. Do you have any closing comments that you want to end on today?
I would just like to say thank you for this opportunity and for being really interested in our work. When some people hear the word libraries, they just think that I sit around and read books all day, which is not what I do as a librarian. Mm-hmm. So thank you for this opportunity, and we really hope that this has been helpful to you, and please feel free to reach out to us at any time. We're happy to answer questions. And yeah,
definitely get in touch. I see this as the beginning of the conversation around this, and I'd love to work with you again to bring this to the CI community. Happy to recommend specific languages, share any more specific information, answer any questions at all. So please get in touch. Happy to talk.
Great, thanks so much. So today we were joined by Amy Neeser and Joanna Thielen. Amy's from Berkeley and Joanna at the University of Michigan. I want to give a quick shout out. So in the call doc, Amy posted some questions for us to consider answering. I just want to invite everybody to take a look at those. How do these findings relate to CARC efforts in the recent NSF CI workforce workshop? What other recommendations do you have for writing more equitable job postings? And what do you do if people push back against these recommendations? So please, if you have ideas on those topics, go ahead and put in a contribution. The call doc will remain open for about another week. This call has been recorded. We will be sending out a link with, or an email with the link to the recording, and you are welcome to share that. If you haven't signed in, please do that now. So there's a link to the call document in the chat. And we'll be getting back together on November 12th. November 12th's topic is optimizing our use. And then in December, we're going to have an all-track social. So we also have a link in the call chat, or in the call doc rather, for suggestions for future topics. We're always interested in hearing what people are looking for to get